Hey everyone, you know the deal by now. One Piece D&D is streamed by Rustage and uploaded to Rustage 2 on YouTube once it's done being edited. Or I suppose I should say, it was, because now we're going into One Piece Marines in just about a few more days after this is uploaded, so get excited for that. Anyway, that's about it for my intro. Let's go!
Oh, hold up your flagons and raise up the sails. Masthead a batten, so we take them off our tails. We don't fly off the wagon, we don't leave any ale. So we go trekking with the luck that never fails.
The crew awakened, and immediately to his dismay, Louis bore witness to the amputated captain of his idols, the Baguette Pirates, dying from blood loss. While that happened, Duros and Ragnar pried open the bars and were quick to audibly notice what sounded like a struggle between a young girl and a man. They dashed towards the noise where they knocked the man down, interrogated him, and learned this is a cannibalistic facility. They stole his key card and threw him into a nearby cell. The girl they'd saved was named Doxy, and the 12 continued along the soon-discovered minecart tracks to the next area, a room resembling a hospital ward where the crew successfully knocked the doctor unconscious as well, and repeated the same events following verbatim. This time they opened up to the kitchen and tied up the chef. One more trek down another set of tracks and they were finally greeted with a large packaging warehouse, with many employees moving boxes around. Boxes with Ragnar Meat Industries engraved on the side. Just then, the butcher hops down from the foreman's office, making a comment about how he should be proud, dawning the realization onto Ragnar of his fourth son's cannibalistic business endeavors in the new world, piercing him with regret for not killing him when he had the chance. Immediately upon the commencement of battle, William rolls his roulette and miraculously lands on the Gura Nomi. With this fruit, the crew and Doxy easily slaughtered the butcher. Ragnar interrogated one of the nearby workers outside who hadn't realized the chaos that had just occurred in the warehouse just yet, where he learned Ragnar III would be inside of his tower in the main city. With this new knowledge, they board the train en route to the city. Here, Ragnar tells them all about his son, and the lessons he instilled in him, such as being strong is important to protect the ones you love. But the barbarian goes on to explain the latter half of that lesson was lost on the younger Ragnar. Further explaining, he unveiled the mystery of how he lost his eye. While attempting to break up a fight with his son and another barbarian, his son had been the one to gouge it out, and knocked him unconscious. Waking up afterward, Ragnar learned his son had defeated and killed the man he was battling with. Not only that though, he had eaten his opponent's remains, and thus was banished from the village. Ragnar also theorized his son was the one who sold out his family and the other villagers to use this valve. Interrupting that conversation, smashing through the window, was Gunnar Goldeneye, a popular cowboy around these parts. William convinced the conductor to stop the train so Gunnar could bring some of the meats off the cars and burn it as a middle finger to Ragnar, the younger one. While they were talking, the group figured out Gunnar was Atom's father, bringing the two parties closer until they asked if he'd like to join them in taking down Ragnar, to which he agrees, and they decide to meet back up with him at Ragback Steakhouse. Also, I know at some point it's revealed that Doxy has blue blood, but I, for the life of me, can't remember where that's shown, so I'll just say the crew discover all about the evil Emperor Blue Blood here, and how Doxy and Jimmy are the bastard children of the man himself. The train at last arrived at Ragnar City, and the group entered into the Ragback Steakhouse for a much-needed meal. Their server approached them, and lo and behold, it was Monkey D. Chip. He revealed to them he was swindled, causing his amusement park as well as himself to go bankrupt, forcing him to travel the seas in hopes of surviving, eventually landing himself in this restaurant. Later, behind the restaurant, the main four plus Chip met up with Gunnar to discuss the plan to take down the businessman, eventually landing on the mission of building a bar in the middle of town and advertising a Ragnar vs. Ragnar showdown tomorrow with flyers they got from Staples with a fourth wall breaking devil fruit. While that was happening, Doxy and William stole some pineapple juice from a dude named Big Pineapple before arriving back, and the crew entered into their positions, readying themselves for Ragnar IV's entrance. Soon the room began filling up with an audience, and shortly after, Ragnar IV bashed through the entrance with a group of lackeys behind him, one of which being Paige. The father versus son slobberknocker began. The crew also began fighting amongst Ragnar's lackeys. Most importantly, Verona lit page up with so many bullets it ended her existence in seconds. The battle between the two Ragnars at first seemed to be heading towards the sun's victory, but as the fight was prolonged, Ragnar's strength began waning curiously quickly. That's when he demanded to be injected again, but his goons were being kept at bay by the devils. Later, with the assistance of William's devil fruit, he and Verona fused to become the superpower that was Verilium, who sliced into Ragnar, dealing significant damage. After that, it was up to Ragnar to deal the finishing blow. The sun begged, but to no avail. Ragnar finished what he started all those years ago, and cleansed his regrets with tears in his eyes, as he cut his son down, killing him. The barbarian then left the building and buried his son. After that, the crew decided on what they next must do. Defeat one of the emperors of the sea, Blue Blood. Not only for distributing this drug throughout the world, not only for corrupting Ragnar's son, but for bringing Doxy, Jimmy, and hundreds of other children into this world for the sole reason of forcing them into slavery, or to be contained until they were ready to be sent into Ragnar's factory, where they would be slaughtered and processed for the cannibals. Just then, a cannonball exploded through the roof of the tavern. Dashing out, Verona is able to witness a fleet of ships belonging to the Blue Blood pirates. Upon seeing this, the crew bolt to the train station. On the way, William chucks Chip at a lady we'd later learn to be one of Blue Blood's commanders, Seraph. Chip doesn't last an instant as he's seen receiving a holy beatdown from the battle nun. Rest in peace, Chip. Eventually, they reached the train, boarded it, and were quickly caught up with and assaulted by a wolf mink by the name of Sir Percival, another scarily loyal member of Blue Blood's army. They defeated him, and Duros attempted to prevent Ragnar from any more needless killing. But Ragnar's mindset was anywhere from Duros's. Unfortunately, the barbarian pushed Duros aside and decapitated the knight, brutally murdering him, forcing Cyril into an emotion between anger, confusion, fear, and sadness. Ragnar apologized to Cyril, and a few minutes later they decided to steal some of Percival's armor, painted the color of pizza, and gave it to Jimmy. Also en route, they come up with a plan to invade the Emperor's territory. That plan being one quite similar to the one back on Stalingrad. Lissa advanced towards the port where she could begin putting together another hot air balloon. A hot air balloon pirate ship fusion. The crew and gunner, now with their parachutes equipped, were hovering above Blue Blood's territory. An archipelago of islands with enormous bridges connecting them, surrounded by giant steel walls. Before long, cannons had begun firing at them, but were unable to reach. That's when a burst of flames at light speed shot up to the elevation of the ship in seconds, and halted even faster. This was Soldi, a commander in Blue Blood's empire. The captain made the first move on the Wyvern man, who continued to parry William's attack and grab his arm, and followed that up with a breath of fire, piercing the balloon behind them. At that moment, Verona leapt off the ship, and quickly following behind were Ragnar and Duros, who both gallop across the deck and hurtle themselves towards the two. Duros bashed Soldi with his shield midair, and Ragnar followed it up with a tackle, knocking William free but without his sword. Following the initial jumpers, the rest of the crew soon began their skydive as well. Soldi next searched for another fly to swat out of the air, and locked onto Cyril. The water boy was knocked quite off course from this, but luckily they did equip him with a second parachute. At her captain and vice captain's orders, Pearl flew towards Cyril to make sure that he would be okay. William, Verona, Duros, Ragnar, Lissa, and Doxy all landed together in the graveyard, but the rest of the crew were left unaccounted for. I don't know if I ever mentioned the bounties in the previous videos, but these are the ones William uses to inspire his crew to march onward into Yonko territory. William D. Chavston, the Devil's Luck, 600 million. Ragnar, the Bear, 350 million. Duros, the Golden Wolf, 300 million. Verona, the Laughing Joke, 299 million. Pearl, the Crazy Gangster, 150 million. Louis Leclerc, 30 million. Cyril, 20 million, and Lissa, 10 million. The crew entered into a city painted principally in black and white, with large stone chess pieces surrounding them, some being simple statues and others being homes or businesses. They beelined towards the king piece, but before they could even reach it, the Chancellor himself stood before them. He formed a chessboard around everyone, and they were all put into positions on the opposite side of the enemy, revealing he had eaten the chess fruit. The Devil's Luck Pirates versus Kasparov, one of the 4 commanders of Blue Blood's army, begins. The battle lasted quite a while, and thanks to that, William discovered another 6 powers technique, Tempest Kick, which he named River. While that was happening, Pearl and Cyril landed alone together. Walking through the forest, Pearl offhandedly mentioned that the crew felt guilty for causing Cyril to lose his arm, a fact Cyril had no idea about. His thoughts began racing, jumping from one conclusion to the next, realizing they'd only felt bad for the boy and didn't actually save him out of their goodwill. This caused all of the innocent lives the crew had killed to bubble up in his memories. He thought they were truly kind at heart, and that they believed there was a necessity to their terrible actions. Cyril felt mortified, coming upon a question in his mind. Is there truly no justice in this world? Before running off into the forest, leaving Pearl alone. After running for a minute or so, he arrived at a clearing with a vista overlooking the archipelago. Cyril looked down at his reflection in the water's surface and contemplated his own decisions up to this point, wondering if leaving Pearl had been the right course of action. He pondered the inconsistencies in the crew's behavior, and then once again he thought back on himself. As he was having these deep thoughts, his reflection smiled back at him and reached out. From the depths, what emerged was none other than himself. The copy of Cyril began to choke the boy by the neck. He didn't resist, though. Cyril began to accept his death as a positive thing. Not only would he no longer have to feel the pain, guilt, and regret, but he would no longer be a burden to anyone. Cyril let the cold embrace of darkness wash over him, before remembering a voice in his head. A younger Cyril, with his dying mother in his arms, was deeply upset he wasn't able to save the woman in his grasp. His mother instilled in him her final words, exclaiming his kind heart is a beautiful thing, and to let this kind heart be the thing others remember him by. She finished with an I love you, as her final moments washed over Cyril. His eyes then shot open. He transformed his neck into water, freeing himself from his clone's grasp, and then, with a determined fury, blasted the imposter with a jet of water. He next brought out Helios's trident, exclaiming a clone who knows all of his abilities wouldn't know about something he's never used. Wielding the trident, he utterly overpowered the mannequin. Resolve overflowed in the boy as he proclaimed,
People have died. That's a fact. All I can do is do my best to prevent more deaths. Nobody is perfect, and if all we do is beat ourselves up over mistakes we make or things we could or couldn't do, we're wasting time that we could be putting into doing better.
Cyril landed on the puppet and stabbed his trident straight into it, as the skin of the doll faded back into its wooden form. With the string on the puppet's body, he used it to tie back his hair, and ripped off his dirtied and shredded marine jacket, revealing the simple shirt he wore underneath, and then chucked the aforementioned coat into the sea.
I need to find Pearl.
Let's check back in on the last group now. Louie, Jimmy, Gunner, Boss, and Gravy. The five attempted to fend off Soldy the best they could, but were soon running out of tricks up their sleeve, and had their backs against the wall. In that moment, though, Admiral Barry appeared. With his help, the six successfully defeated the commander. Back to the rest of the crew, they decided to rest up for half an hour at a nearby tavern after defeating Kasparov, and soon head towards the North Bridge. They easily dealt with the 8 guards patrolling the bridge, one of which being Marmite, Jam, and Marmalade's brother. That's not important though. What is important is that he informed them of Pearl's location, the base of the Archbishop's tower, where she was about to be executed. They reached the grounds beneath the tower, and there Pearl was, seeming incredibly weak, with the executioner pulling back his axe, readying a swing to eliminate Pearl. The crew did not waste a single second and intervene, saving Pearl and killing the rope man. Ragnar snags his executioner's axe as they enter into the Tower of God. With the flip of a coin, they decide to descend the staircase, and thankfully learn that William didn't outright murder their previous companion, as they see a beaten and bruised monkey mink by the name of Chip behind a cell. The jailer in charge of him was Jelly, brother to Jam, Marmalade, and Marmite, who ate the jelly fruit. They beat him down, let him leave, saved Chip, then ascended the stairs soon after Jelly. Whilst climbing, William rolls the clay fruit and dubs Doxy an official member of the crew. Speaking of Doxy, upon seeing the Archbishop, Seraph, or who we now learn to be Doxy's mom, combat began as Doxy screamed,
You know my fucking mom! My mom's dead! Fuck you!
as she bolted at Seraph with her knives out, forcing the crew to rein her in. Immediately, clay emerged from William's body as he created a dome of earth to surround the tower's roof to render her possible flying advantage moot. The battle raged on, and she eventually knocked Chip unconscious. After taking enough damage, she resorted to her transformation, morphing the nun into a biblically accurate angel in the form of a throne. Breaking through the dome, she levitated into the sky while directing a beam of light into Ragnar, William, and Chip, causing the former to disappear. Ragnar awoke in a limbo between life and death. Here he fought with Marrow in a one-on-one deathmatch, with our barbarian obviously succeeding. Soon another beam of justice grazed Chip, causing him to disappear as well. Everest shortly appeared to assist them, revealing the Marines were doing a raid on Blue Blood's archipelago, and he was sent to assist them in taking down Seraph. They were thankfully able to defeat the Angel with his help, who also informed them that the rest of their crew were in Marine custody, and would be released once they were finished with this mission, if they would help them take down the Black Knight while Admiral Barry takes down Blue Blood. They agreed since they were already planning on doing so anyway, so they lowered the next bridge connecting them to a different island. Just then though, a poof of smoke appeared where Chip's body once was, and emerging from the smoke was not Chip, but the former captain of the Devil's Luck Pirates. Well, they hadn't adopted that name back then. Rick, implying Chip was the one who had caused the crash at the beginning of the story. Rick immediately began arguing with William about who the captain should be, but to no avail. Eventually, Rick agreed to help them out for the time being, but not join back on the crew. Down at the base of the tower, the crew received medical aid from the Marines where they patched up their wounds. In lieu of any extra med kits, William requested for a squad of Marines to assist them with the elimination of the Black Knight. Everest agreed and let them borrow Lieutenant Apollo and a squad of 12 subordinates. The group marched forward to the Black Knight's territory. Atop the bridge was Horse, the commander's steed. They dealt with him and thankfully accrued 0 casualties. Next up, the Black Knight's page boy appeared, who transformed into a piece of paper and floated away. Possibly dying. Maybe. Following him was the Black Knight's farmhand, who transformed into a giant onion. The Marines shot him full of holes and he died. And then his accountant. And a secretary. And the man who feeds his chickens. And a shoe shiner. And a chef. And his therapist. William shoots that guy. With just about all of the castle employees dead, they're able to walk past the end of the bridge just fine. It didn't take long to discover the flame-engulfed knights who wordlessly attacked the opposition. And without any time to react, Apollo 13's Saturn, Jupiter, Moony, and Sunny were reduced to ash. Some back and forth later, and Apollo was up. Like, literally. He jumped up to the parapet the Black Knight was standing atop, aided by his Moon fruit, and was instantly obliterated with the man's flaming chains wrapping around his body until they were too tight and exploded the Marine, as their squad was reduced to Rick 8. Rick was in that same general group, so now he's their substitute leader, I guess. Soon after, an attack from William's River revealed the identity of the Black Knights, their old friend Blake. Announcing power at all costs is what's important to prevent what happened to Cleo happening ever again. Ragnar dearly attempted to bring Blake back to his senses with a speech along with a hug. The flames were still erupting from Blake's body as Ragnar clenched his arms around the former assassin. Blake attempted to shake him off with a refutation of flame, but Ragnar held his ground, pushing past his limits and staying cautious with sheer willpower. Just then, a burst of water shot out of nowhere, extinguishing some of Blake's flames. The blast coming from none other than Cyril. After he made his appearance, the Rick 8 stood their ground and fired at the Black Knight, with their aim on targets as their bullets pierced through his armor. In retaliation, Blake unleashed a firestorm on the squad, killing Uranus, Mars, the Star, Mercury, and Venus, reducing the squad to the one very lonely Pluto. And Rick, I guess. William returned fire with a Tempest kick, to which Blake responded with a refutation of flame, immolating the area in a fiery blaze. Ragnar, still gripping Blake, took the entirety of the blow, yet he still remained standing. Thanks to this, Duros was finally able to break through his steel helmet and knock out the Black Knight with his hilt, ending the fight. Earl hugged Cyril after the battle was over, and they brought the unconscious Blake into the castle and chained him to a table with sea stone handcuffs. Before they marched onwards to Blue Blood, they sent Pearl to fetch Louie and Jimmy. Oddly enough, not Gunner though. As for Lissa, Verona had her reconvene with the rest of the crew, and they sent Pluto back to his Marine comrades. Louie handed William his sword back, and finally the Devil's Luck pirates trudged forward towards Blue Blood's throne. Outside they met Jester again, who, in exchange for sparing his life, created clones of Doxy, Rick, and Blake, then left and hid. At last, entering into Blue Blood's throne room, they immediately see rivers of blue blood flowing throughout and witness Admiral Barry on the floor, defeated under Blue Blood's feet. Upon seeing this, William rolls his roulette and it lands on the string fruit, and they begin the battle with Blue Blood leaping towards Duros, where he bashed him immediately and followed up with a chokehold on Duros. Once the knight fell unconscious, he was tossed aside. Next, Verona decided to revive Admiral Barry in the meantime, but it did not take long before Blue Blood noticed Louis reversing the effects the Emperor had inflicted on Duros moments prior, as he dashed towards Louis, slamming him into the ground, leaving the Frenchman unconscious. Then, Barry proceeded to miss his brig throw and hit William, followed up by Duros, attempting to hit Blue Blood but missing and stabbing into Doxy. Oh, God. It's okay. Rick doesn't screw up though. He pulls off a shot with his blunderbuss and then holsters his weapon and decides it isn't worth dying here, and he leaves as well. Oh boy. Barry had another brick though, and with his throw, it traveled out of his grasp and into Blue Blood's side, to which the Emperor responded by throwing the brick back at the rectangular man, knocking him unconscious yet again. In the chaos, William sneakily snuck up to Blue Blood and pierced his side, but the beast simply backhanded him and knocked the captain out. Verona then sent one of his remaining healing serums to Louis, reviving him. Recognizing Louis' ability was paramount for the crew's survival, Blue Blood saw the Frenchman begin to open his eyes. Within seconds, though, Louis Leclerc was sunk even further into the ground with a blue-blooded bash, brutally slaughtering the man in less than a second. Duros, in response, stepped up to Blue Blood and slashed him multiple times with benevolence, but that was hardly felt by the king in front of him. Almost comedically, Blue Blood grabbed Duros by the hair and began smacking him against the floor Hulk style, nearly KOing the Terraco Knight. Ragnar, upon bearing witness to his friends falling one by one, realized there was no other choice. In disparity, against his philosophy of strength, the barbarian dropped into the river of blue blood, flowing throughout the room, committing the very deed he rebuked his son for, the very blood which had turned Doxy's mother, along with Blake, to madness. This action evolved the bear. His muscles grew and his fur turned blue. Ragnar then proceeded to swing his axe, dealing an incredible chunk of damage to the blue-blooded king. In the meantime, Verona dashed to his captain and halted his blood loss, stabilizing William. Blue Blood noticed this though and leapt towards Verona, grabbed the marksman by the neck and slammed him against the wall, nearly knocking him out. But miraculously, Verona stayed conscious. Duros then took Verona's place and moved him out of Blue Blood's sight, causing the Emperor to shatter Duros' bones with another godlike fist, again causing Duros to fall inert. Blue Blood's next target was the Crimson Dragon in front of him, so he uppercut the flying beast, and with a single blow, the girl was forced out of her dragon form. While Pearl and Ragnar were busy distracting the Emperor, William used his awakened devil fruit to choose a power not on the roulette, resulting in him gaining the ability to transport anyone who he'd previously touched to his location. In a panic, the captain summoned a 5-month pregnant Luna, so she joined the fray. After that, Verona enacted the brilliant idea of throwing Spinkle's substance that created a clone of the user down the hatch of the raging blue bear, spawning a second Ragnar. Upon seeing this, Blue Blood had resigned himself to his fate with a simple,
"Oh, thank you for proving me right. My only regret was I never found what I came here looking for."
He just barely managed to get that out though. Ragnar's voice echoed out,
This is what you fucking get for killing my son.
followed by a combination attack of both Ragnar smashing down on Blue Blood's head. Eventually, Blue Blood fell, and the main Ragnar followed him down. At this point, the axes were dropped, and the beast began viscerally clawing at Blue Blood's head, massacring the man until he was unrecognizable. He tore through the flesh, the muscle, and the bone, until Ragnar was maniacally laughing and crying as he continued clawing through the ground beneath the butchered Emperor's remains, breaking his fingers in the process. What resided in the hole after Ragnar was done could not even be recognizable as a body anymore, and after that, Ragnar fell unconscious. Following a deafening silence, William began first summoning marine medics to heal the injured, and afterward anyone he could think of. Dane Goodman, Trevor, Rick, who he punched the shit out of for abandoning them mid-fight, Gunnar, Lissa, who almost confesses to Verona, Gravy, Little Ricky, Boss, who Trevor almost kills, and then Esther. Barry thanked William for defeating Blue Blood, before every one of them passed out from exhaustion. After a horrific dream where they fought Kermit the Frog, the first crewmate to awake was Gravy, who cooked a large breakfast for the crew, followed by Ragnar, who puked in the toilet upon waking up. And in the mirror, a few strands of silver hair could be seen atop his head. Soon the rest of the crew also awoke, and were greeted with Tempest and Olaf, the newest members of the reformed Eight Flames, who were hired by Trevor to investigate into and apprehend the fourth brother from the Eons the Devil's Luck pirates never found. Also, they're here to make sure Blake's alright, so Trevor established a deal with the lot to trade Blake for the fourth brother, which they agreed to. After all that had happened, Dane Goodman decided to join the Marines, so Trevor ordered a newly promoted Pluto to escort the businessman to become an accountant for them. With Pearl's assistance, they cremated Louis' corpse and sent his soul to heaven in a funeral. Finally arriving back at their ship, which had been docked on Blue Blood's harbor, they set sail with the main crew, as well as Tempest, Olaf, Luna, and Aster. Next stop, Aneris Island. I think that's how it's pronounced, I don't know for sure. En route, Lissa began crafting a spaceship so Aster and Luna could return home. Once they arrived, they left those three as well as Boss, Gravy, and Little Ricky on the ship. They stepped foot on the deserted island and weren't able to see much aside from a rock with some writing on it as well as a rapier-shaped hole. William inserted the late Louis's blade into the opening, causing the rocks to shift, revealing a staircase. They descended the stairs deeper and deeper until eventually discovering an underground city dilapidated beyond repair. The most unique building to note would be the clock tower, the only building with light emanating from it. They walked towards it, were interrupted by a giant mechanical dragon, defeated the dragon, and soon entered the tower. Here they were met with the fourth brother, Louis Lecloc, but from a different timeline. Tinkering on a machine the crew weren't quite able to make sense of. Turned out he jumped to this timeline to escape a near-death situation, a situation doomed to repeat itself. That is, if Louis' plan of going back in time to Louis' inception and implanting a device inside of him to create an immortal Louis fails. They at first requested for him to heal Boss, but began steering the conversation in the complete wrong direction, and soon began to correct their course, but Louis ended up just slapping the button to initiate the machine out of annoyance. The machine had begun whirring and shaking, with a panicking Louis proclaiming this wasn't right. Then, a white flash blinded the group, and they awoke in a field of grass. But without Louis. Here they're woken up by a much more youthful blue blood, whose name we learn to be Arthur. The man explained to them he was about to go to war with the kingdom in front of them, who stole a holy relic very important to the Blue Bloods, and the aliens are here to steal it back. That relic being the very first devil fruit, rumored to harbor catastrophic power. To avoid any unnecessary death, the devils acted as a vanguard unit in an attempt to peacefully retrieve the devil fruit for them. Before that, though, they took an 8-hour rest, merrily chatting with Arthur and his parents, as well as their army. Finally, though, they do get going. On the way, about halfway there, a giant explosion boomed, beginning in the capital. In seconds, it had engulfed the Devil's Luck pirates, and their vision went white. They woke up on a field of grass, being greeted by Blue Blood once more. This time they trick Blue Blood into believing they are seers from the future sent to retrieve the fruit. Anyway, this time they definitely don't take that long rest and march into the city. They are met with giant buildings reaching into the clouds, created with a mix of clockwork and modern architecture, with cars driving through the city's streets, leaving the crew flabbergasted. They entered a Starbucks. Ragnar went Karen mode for not serving him a Frappuccino. He flipped a table and left. William and Doxy then snuck into Big Papa's casino, robbed the place, and returned to the crew. With their newfound money, they let Ragnar go in and get his Frappuccino, but was denied yet again, this time for having no shirt. In retaliation, the barbarian sliced the counter in half, to which the barista desperately called the police and made Ragnar his drink. Ragnar tasted it, and it was downright wonderful. He apologized profusely, fixed up the table into pristine, better than new condition, thanked her, and left. At this point, the police had arrived to apprehend Ragnar, but when they entered, nothing seemed to be the matter. No table was smashed in two, and it looked like business as usual, besides the girl who was confused to all hell, swearing he did it, causing the officers to worry if she was having a psychotic episode. Next time, don't be rude to paying customers, you stupid bitch, Ragnar uttered before going on his way. Finally, they made their way towards the clock tower, where Duros deceived his way into the building. There, the police led him up the stairs to old Louis' deceased body. He relayed that info to the rest of his crew, so the rest of them, besides Ragnar, snuck in to see Louis. Verona animated an item in the room to figure out how Louis died, cause of death being another Louis, this time with a red coat. Meanwhile, acting as a distraction for the rest of them, Ragnar ran back to the Starbucks and caused another commotion, making the poor barista cry once more, where Ragnar hoped to acquire his much-needed Frappuccino. He tried to make one himself, but utterly failed. Anyway, before long, after William climbed to the top of the clock tower to see where the explosion started, the boom occurred, once more resetting the crew. This time they didn't waste any time and dashed to the clock tower to save Louis. And after some anticipation, the Red Louis arrived to assassinate his clone. The crew managed to prevent that, and defeated the red-coated Louis, with a couple casualties of William and Ragnar. They searched his pockets and figured out he's part of an organization dubbed the Void Police. And then the inevitable blast reverted them back to the field. Upon waking, they made a mad dash to the corner of the city William noticed, and Ragnar perceived the Starbucks on the way. This time in bear form, he obliterated the counter, and threatened to kill her if he didn't get his Frappuccino. Like the previous time, she called the cops but soon got to work on his coffee. He chugged it, repaired the desk, and promised he'd be back, and turned back to human as he was walking out, scarring this poor woman yet again, causing her to have somewhat of a mental breakdown. As they left, they saw the girl we learned to be named Clementine in handcuffs being taken away for a false police call. Anyway, Cyril and Pearl go on a date, and the rest of the crew decided to head toward the museum in hopes of finding some clues there. They end up setting up a heist to sneak in the back, and what they found was more than clues. They eventually discovered the first devil fruit in all of its pineapple glory. As William was about to grab it, 3 Void agents appeared from a newly visible door in the center of the room. Agents Louis, Agent Blueno, and Agent V, an older version of Verona without scars, to stop them. After a hard-fought battle, they killed Louis and Verona and interrogated Blueno, which they figured out the goal of the Void Agents, to make sure nobody eats that fruit, ensuring the day repeats itself until their boss is able to close the time loop. Back to Clementine now. The next thing she knew, she was in jail, and was greeted by the director of the Void Police, an old woman with an appearance that screamed royalty. The woman claimed she needed her help to reverse the effects of the great tragedy about to befall them. After some heavy debating, Verona established the idea of Duros' benevolence consuming the sword via the marksman's devil fruit. So they went forward with this idea. Upon consumption, they bore witness to the world altering around them. Pieces of the devil fruit flying off into different shapes and colors, exploding off into the all blue. Benevolence also exploded into a bright light, before, almost anticlimactically, they awoke in the room from before with Louis. The only difference here being a lack of benevolence. And in its place was a different sword with a note attached to its hilt. The note revealed the world had ended in the moment of its consumption, and the sword had gained the ability to reshape reality and time. Benevolence did so with every detail of their old timeline to a T, only without benevolence, because performing such a feat killed the sword. Before its final moments, though, it created this new weapon for Duros. Soon, they figured out Louis hadn't retained his memory of the time-looping journey prior, and they told him briefly what happened and destroyed his machine. He came to the realization that his dream to save every Louis may have been childish, and decided to assist the crew to heal Boss, and to amend the past mistake of establishing the Eons. So he agreed to willingly be exchanged for Blake. Finally, they exited the cave. En route to their ship, a capsule slams into the ground from the skies above them. Void Agent Aria makes her appearance. They defeated the jellyfish girl quickly, and once they arrived back at their ship, behind them was a blast of light, absolutely destroying the island by a dark shadow moving amongst the clouds. They got moving to avoid any further contact with the Void Agents, where Louis at last healed the decrepit-looking boss back to his regular self, where he was finally able to greet the crew in a distinguished manner, where William especially introduced to him his new adopted daughter, Duxie. While that was happening, Ragnar's headaches and withdrawals from the blue blood were getting worse, so he returned below deck and decided to microdose, which made him feel far better. A few days of sailing later, and they arrived for the fourth brother Blake exchange. At the newest base of the Eight Flames, a giant floating candle. They decided to visit Hemlock while they were here, but instead found her bloodied body almost lifeless. Louis healed her a day or so backwards, revealing an old lady bursted through the ceiling, stole her logboses and left. Next, we're hard cutting to the exchange. William deceived Trevor that 1. Boss is dead, and 2. Boss was the fourth brother. Unfortunately, they still required a replacement to arrest in his place, that they could rescue later so Trevor could still say he captured the fourth brother. So they ended up sending old Louis anyway, who Trevor was convinced was Louis' brother, Jean Leclerc. Not lying, Verona told Trevor about the existence of the all-powerful Void Police, and how taking down them is paramount, so the Vice Admiral settled for justice to join them and take them down. When they handed off Louis for Blake, the crew figured out Ragnar was hanging onto a syringe of blue blood, and they investigated further, discovering he had more on the ship. William and Pearl left to destroy it, but as they were about to light it up, Ragnar attempted to dash and stop them, and that's when Duros and Verona managed to hold down the barbarian, who couldn't manage to shake the two off even in Big Bear mode, making Ragnar feel helpless, as all he could do was watch as the blue blood was burned. It was around this point where Lissa's spaceship was at last completed, so they decided to head up tomorrow. The main crew plus Pearl, Lissa, Cyril, Lil Ricky, Doxy, and Trevor boarded the ship, as the A-Team launched off. 45 minutes of chaotic motion sickness and shaking later, and they were finally able to see the cylindrical space station in front of them. And atop it was a man. A certain man, with green hair, an eye patch, and 3 swords at his hip. His name was Void Agent Zorro. The man then suddenly disappeared, and the next thing they knew, their ship's engine had been cut, and was on a collision course with the space station, soon crashing into one of the docking bays of the ship. A ridiculously tough battle with the swordsman was had, but miraculously the Devil's Luck pirates emerged victorious, with William dealing the final blow with the Devil's Deal, slicing the man in 2. They survived, but unfortunately it resulted in a depraved blue blood Ragnar in a rage once more after licking up Doxy's blood that had splattered on the floor. The only difference this time though is that the bear had lost control, so the crew were now tasked with quelling the beast. Perhaps just as difficult as the battle with Zorro itself, Ragnar, after a grueling beatdown and minutes of convincing later, a voice echoed throughout Ragnar's head. It was his captain's. William at last broke through Ragnar's rage and calmed the bear down. The crew afterwards shoddily patched themselves up for the sure-to-be battles to be had in the near future. Speaking of which, after walking through a corridor in the ship, they met in a Void Agent's uniform Crystal Pete and Agent Sonata. The devils defeated them as well, and they moved onwards into the following room, which was surrounded by complete darkness. The main four continued into the void, and were approached by a supremely creepy man inside. They blinked and were suddenly all children, as the masked man in front of them forced them to live through their worst nightmares imaginable once again. One of these nightmares being William's first murder, with him having killed a celestial dragon, a woman we would recognize as Miria, the director of the Void Police. Eventually, they decided to attempt to attack the masked man, who had been portraying the faces of their past in the pseudo-flashbacks. Ultimately, they discovered it had been tricking them to hurt their own friends, or even themselves while in this dreamlike state. Upon realizing this, it took no time at all for the captain to wake himself up, and subsequently he awoke the rest of the crew. Once finding their bearings, they took note of the room no longer being shrouded in darkness, and quickly noticed an eternal pose hooked up to a bunch of pods similar to the one Arya descended in. And on the monitor, it read, Destination Laughtail. An illiterate Duros walked into one of the pods, and the rest of the A-team soon followed suit. All but Verona and Lissa. The mechanic once and for all confessed her feelings to Verona, before he set off to a surely difficult battle. Left speechless for a moment, the man told her he'll think on it, and entered into his pod at last. Once arriving at the stormy island, their pods opened and they bore witness to the director of the Void Police, along with Clementine, next to the location where the first devil fruits, also known as the One Piece, would soon grow. The director monologued to William, explaining how she's here because they had created a timeline where she, a former immortal, dies no matter what. For reasons unknown, Miria had amassed a collection of memories in her mind of the innumerable times she was slain by William, and steeled herself to finally put an end to the madness she had endured and suffered through. Setting the battlefield into motion, she summoned many enemies from their past, including, but not limited to, Mero, Arzen, Valve, Cleo, the Timberlord, and eventually even Blue Blood. To back them up, the crew's reinforcements soon arrived. The rest of the Devil's Luck pirates, and soon some of the Eight Flames. During their battle, they slowly dwindled the opposition's numbers, and managed to defeat their former foes with maximum difficulty, with the bear once again having to rely on the Emperor's blood to gain power. Also, Duros made Clementine pass out from fear. Just then, after every enemy on the battlegrounds was dealt with, a man appeared from a rift in space, next to the director. That man was Cranston, the old dude William killed when they were just beginning their journey. Mero's father, the father of time. The man who ate the timeline fruit. The man summoned the true final boss of the series, Gold Roger, the king of the pirates. He had fame, power, and wealth beyond your wildest dreams. Before they hung him from the gallows, these were the final words he said. My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first. I left everything I owned in one piece. Ever since, pirates from all over the world set sail for the Grand Line, searching for One Piece, the treasure that would make their dreams come true. Yo! No, we're not doing that. With his introduction finished, he immediately killed bullets without hesitation, and later Verona lost his gun named Little Timmy. But honestly, they dealt with this fight incredibly well, or rather the Pirate King was having an off day. In any case, dealing the final blow to the king of the pirates was William, with a river slicing the man in two, denying the Pirate King, and by extension the Void Police's victory. Cranston, in a last-ditch effort, attempted to send them away to a different timeline, but his abilities had lost their usefulness in this new timeline created by benevolence. William walked up to this pathetic senior citizen and kicked his head clean off. Next, they opened the chest and laughed. Alright, we're just gonna do a quick epilogue because it is currently almost 5 a.m. I should not be up. You can probably see the rings around my eyes. I didn't think this recording would take this long, but I screwed up so much. And anyway, alright, here we go. William disbands the crew to quit while they were ahead to enjoy his life with his new family. Verona began his journey to discover what it means to love someone, and receives a kiss from Lissa as they continue that journey together. Duros flies up with Luna and asks her to become the king of Duros. Cyril and Pearl return to Terraco and eventually become a couple and have a child. Jasper and Trevor become a couple and rule over Terraco together. Gravy started a chain of restaurants where he's the head chef. The Eight Flames open an orphanage. But finally we have Ragnar's epilogue. 10 years later, somewhere on the Grand Line, Ragnar, with many white streaks throughout his hair, sits atop a throne. Behind him lay tanks full of a blue liquid with creatures swimming in them, and connected to those are tubes of the liquid pulsing straight into the barbarian's forearms. The man gets up and declares he won't let anyone get in his way, and that the whole world will be his battleground. To be continued in One Piece D&D Marines. Oh, I'm done.
Finally! I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.
See